We have Shane Willis from Australia here with us. Shane is the president of Ornamental Fish International. He's the president from the year 2015, am I right? Shane
Yes.
is the Shane? Shane is the managing director of National Aquaculture Training Institute from Australia. He's also a visiting professor in Shanghai Ocean University. Shane will speak to you on Ornamental Fish International activities for sustainable trade. Over to you, Shane. Over to you, Shane.
Yep. Just hang on a sec.
Yes, you can start, Shane.
Just warming up, Minnie.
That's great. That's good.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Minnie. And Sven, once again, that was a really good presentation. I enjoyed it. And yeah, I'll touch a little bit on what you've talked about, but it was very, very good. As Minnie said, so my name's Shane Willis, president of Ornamental Fish International. And today I'm going to be talking a bit about our organisation and what we do in terms of looking after or helping to look after the trade. So who is OFI and what do we do? So OFI started out in 1980. It was founded by a group of industry members, mainly European based, but there was also members from Australia, Singapore, other Asian countries and the US. And basically it was started out to try and sort of make some, or develop some better cohesion and trading in the trade. There was concerns at the time about some traders that weren't operating at a good standard. There was a need to sort of address governments around the world in terms of new legislation that was coming about. And it was thought that, some sort of trade organisation would be an ideal platform to do that. So basically the purpose was really to try and defend the interests of members and advocate for the international aquarium industry around the world. And this is, as Sven's pointed out, we're active with CITES, the EU Parliament, which is where we're based, but also other governments around the world. We deal a lot with exporters from Asia, and really we advocate for the industry with those groups. We're also, I suppose, providing education and trying to improve industry standards. And I think Sven's sort of touched on that a couple of times within his talk. There is a need to improve standards for a lot of operations. Fortunately, that need is diminishing as we get better and better at what we do. But certainly we've got a duty of care to look after the livestock that we deal with. And, it's an important thing is to try and improve the standards of care, how we transport fish, how we treat fish, etc. So it's a very important part of what we do. And I guess the other sort of last dot point there is talking about promoting the benefits of our industry. A lot of people don't realise it, but there's literally tens of thousands of people across, particularly the Asia-Pacific region, but even in South America, many sort of developing countries that really rely on our industry as part of their livelihoods. And we've seen a case the last couple of years where exports of corals were banned from Indonesia, and it was estimated that maybe 10 to 12,000 people lost their livelihoods because of this ban in trade. And I think that's a very important consideration. And certainly, our industry, I think, meets a lot of the goals as stated by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And, this is a very important thing that we want to promote throughout the world and, into CITES, the EU Parliament and other organisations that we deal with. There's often a little bit of confusion about what OFI is about. In essence, we're a trade association or organisation. We're not a quality assurance scheme, so we don't actually have a certification scheme or anything, although that's probably something that we need to look at in the future, as Sven was pointing out before. But generally, though, the OFI members have a pretty good reputation. We've got some of the largest traders around the world. Many traders have been in the industry for 30, 40 years. Certainly some of the pioneers of the industry have been members of OFI for a long time. And I think that's a very good thing for membership, that we are sort of viewed as being some of the, the better operators around the world. about 4 years ago, we introduced the OFI Charter, and that basically outlines a set of ethical and sustainable best practices, or points that we now make members abide to. This sets out a range of principles about ethical trading, how we deal with livestock, making sure that we actually work towards the legal, national and international trade laws, etc. It's about being good corporate citizens and taking responsibility for our actions in the industry. The other thing is OFI members are from all over the world, and it's great to to go to trade shows, etc. We're a bit of a large multinational family in a way. And certainly, as sort of there was a little bit of discussion before we started this presentation, it's been hard with COVID to actually get together and talk. But trade shows like Akrama, Interzoo, etc., we do tend to get around, talk a lot, exchange ideas, and it's having that sort of commonality about being an OFI member is really good to help exchange ideas, and that's a really huge benefit for a lot of people. And we do strongly support that sort of activity. In the past, we've had dinners at Akrama, and John would remember we had quite good dinners and conferences, etc. So it's very good. We do try and attend as many trade shows as we can, and in order to save money, we generally sort of contribute to help organise things for industry at these trade shows in exchange for some free travel there. But I think it's important to try and attend as many shows as possible, to talk to different people. And in the past, we regularly attend Interzoo and Akrama, SIPS in China. We've been to various other ones like the Taiwan Aquarium Expo a couple of years ago, and it's really good to go to some countries and actually experience meeting people and talking to them, and really finding out what the issues are and helping to explain ways that we can deal with these issues. And another important thing that we often do when we go to these trade shows is lobby different government organisations and NGOs. And that's a key part of what we do in the EU Parliament, is we actually have a lobbyist, works 2 or 3 days a week, and actually represents us within the EU Parliament and working groups, etc., which I'll talk a bit more about in a few minutes. But sort of the core activities is really trying to communicate and act as a sort of a go-between industry and different government organisations. So in terms of membership, we've got members from 31 countries around the world, and members pretty well from all the major fish exporting and importing nations. So breakdown in membership, about 40% of our members are in Europe, about 50 to 60% are in Asia, and the rest are from sort of the rest of the world. So we have a really good mix of people in terms of importers and exporters, farmers. We have collectors, breeders, a few consultants like myself and Sven, and a few others, manufacturers, publishers. There's plant specialists amongst the group, freight forwarders and airlines, some exhibition companies, and even a couple of university departments. So we have a very big mix of different types of people involved with the organisation. And I think that's really important, because it's a good way to actually bring different ideas together as a group and discuss them. Not one person has sort of the solution to most problems that we face, and it's good to have opinions and input from a range of different people about some of the issues that we have to deal with. Another thing that's important, as I said before, is about keeping members informed and communicating to the industry. We produce an OFI journal, 3 editions per year, and John Dawes, who's speaking later, is our editor. Does a fantastic job, along with Monique and the rest of the team. And I think it's a really important flagship for our industry. It's something that we can use to help promote what's happening in the industry, and the good stories and even the bad stories. It's sometimes. So we don't have a huge publication, and we like to expand that. But it's a very good medium to get our message out. We also have a range of newsletter updates. Obviously, have our website. We have an educational series of books, covering a whole range of topics. I think there's 7 in the series. We need to start working on a few more, but it's an ongoing issue. Sort of only recently started to get into the social media side of things. OFI has sort of been more of an inward-looking group, just amongst membership, but we've increased our social media coverage using Facebook, started using WhatsApp groups a lot to communicate to membership, and obviously trying to get the word out about what we do a lot more. And the other key thing, as I've talked about before, is meetings, face-to-face meetings, conferences and trade shows, which is such an important part of dealing with people. Is that face-to-face communication is great, but obviously in times of COVID, webinars like this are a really, really good tool to talk to many, many people. And I'm not sure how many people we've actually got online now, but 1,500 is a really good effort. So again, that's congratulations to you for organising this. So sometimes when I'm talking to people, they want to know what do we do, what have we done. It's sort of hard to sort of pin your hat on a number of different successes, I guess, or things that we've done over the years. And there's many, many things that we've achieved in the background that we haven't really promoted widely. But I wanted to go through just a few of the things that we've done. And I guess one of the big ones for Europe is, OFI was successful in negotiating the closed facility status for imports of ornamental fish to the EU. Now, if that wasn't the case, it'd be a lot harder to import ornamental fish into the EU, and certainly the costs of running an import business in the EU would be significantly higher than what it is now. And that was largely Dr. Alex Plogue, sadly passed away a few years ago, and he was pivotal in being able to negotiate on behalf of the industry in terms of developing that closed facility status. Ongoing, we do maintain a very strong presence in a number of EU working groups in terms of invasive alien species, aquatic animal health, aquaculture, and some other key sort of working groups. And that's really important because we can actually have direct input to people that are making decisions on legislation that will affect our industry. Obviously, another key part of that is that we actually do a lot of submissions, provide industry input on different legislation that's being developed. Another thing that we achieved for the EU, which again would have had worldwide ramifications really, is successfully arguing against listing epizootic ulcerative syndrome on health certificates for ornamental fish. And this would have affected around 45% or so of the fish being imported into the EU. Could have meant that some of those fish were no longer able to be exported to the EU. So it would have impacted exporters sending fish into the EU, as well as the importers there, significantly adding to the complexity of documentation required, certification and testing in export countries prior to export. And again, that was a key work from Dr. Alex Plogue. It was a very, very important step that we did for the industry. Some of the other things, Sven's been, as he's sort of, I hope you all got from his talk about CITES, has been very active in CITES for a long, long time. Some of the key things that we've sort of been involved arguing against the listing of Banggai cardinals due to not having solid science. And re-emphasise what Sven was saying. OFI as an organisation is very supportive of legislation that's based on science that leads to sustainable outcomes for the industry. What we don't want to see is having emotive, ideological driven legislation that doesn't have a benefit to the industry, and Sven highlighted several sort of examples of that. We were involved with arguing against the banning the trade of hard corals at CITES, helped develop the CITES permit system. We helped negotiate a temporary ban on bee sale, which affected salamanders, etc., for the import into the EU. This was basically an industry moratorium on importing and setting up a precautionary quarantine type setup. And that's actually prevented a total ban on imports. It's not a very important part of the industry, but we feel that was important because that sets a precedent for potentially developing a similar system for other species that may get may have a health concern for the EU. We were also involved in strongly lobbying the Indonesian government regarding the coral export ban there. That was finally lifted after 18 months. Don't take the credit for doing that, but certainly we had some meetings with the minister involved, several senior officials, and tried to really paint a picture about the major impact on a lot of people's lives and also the global impact. Sorry. Okay. So that's a bit about OFI and what we sort of do. Now what I wanted to talk about is what's happening in the industry and what are some of the issues that we're sort of looking at going towards the future. People always like to know stats and values, what's happening in industry. So I thought I'd just give you two or three slides about what is happening. So in terms of a bit of a snapshot of the industry, it's actually one of the things the first thing I want to say, it's actually very hard to get good statistics on trade of our industry. We actually use UN Comtrade data. This is based on import-export data that's provided by countries to the UN. It's the most accurate data that we can find. There's no data on actual species trade or anything except for the CITES listed species. So it's very hard to get anything below like a total value of trade in terms of numbers and value. But even that is a bit rubbery. Different countries tend to report differently. There's issues with some data is not provided to UN Comtrade by countries, or it's very late. Maybe it comes 2 or 3 years after the year. There's underreporting or undervaluing of invoices. In some cases, the data is reported including freight costs, and others it's not. So it's not 100% accurate, but it's the best that we've got. And I'll show you a slide in a minute. But basically, what we feel like the market's been fairly flat since the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009. However, there was actually a pretty significant spike in trade last year. Now, the big problem is 2020. What's going to happen this year? It's very hard to pick, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later on. But initially, when I'm talking to people all around the world, our industry's experienced huge problems due to COVID with lack of air travel. So it's been extremely difficult for exporters to send fish to the major markets in the US, Europe, China, Japan, etc. However, the demand for fish has been extremely strong in those markets. So where people have actually been able to ship fish, the demand is extremely high, and the retail sales have gone through the roof. And I've actually talked even to some of the accessory suppliers, and one of them told me, one of the major ones said, well, they've never had a busier year. The only problem is they just can't keep up with demand. So it'll be interesting to see what the stats come out this year. I would tend to suggest that for 2020, the figures will be down just because of lack of freight capacity by airlines. But certainly, the hobby has seen somewhat of a resurgence over the last few months. In terms of the countries involved with trade, there's around about 100 different countries that are actively trading, and Asia continues to be the major supplier of fish in the market. Traditionally, it's been dominated by Singapore, but we see other countries emerging as major exporters. The EU and the USA continue to be the major markets for our industry. Countries like China, India as well, and the Middle East continue to grow in importance as well, and we'll continue to see that. There's also some indication that South America and Africa, as the median incomes increase and people have more disposable incomes, that the hobby is becoming more popular there as well. So for this graph, what I've done, I've taken the UN Comtrade data. I actually have this data from May this year, so it may have changed a little bit. Now, the data only goes back to 2019, and we can see 3 lines. So the blue line is the total value of trade in hundreds of millions. So it's about $360 million worth of trade in 2019. The grey line you see here is freshwater exports. And then the yellow line down the bottom is the marine exports. And you can see that there's a fairly significant uptick in exports from 2018 to 2019. As I said, I'm not really sure why, but certainly it's encouraging to see, some increase after sort of a flattening or even a slight decrease over the past sort of 10 years or so, 8 to 10 years. So in terms of the major importers of freshwater ornamental fish, you can see here from the pie chart, and again, it's based on the UN.com data, USA 25%. So it's still the major market. And the other thing about the USA, it's got a huge domestic market as well. I'm not sure about the latest stats, but I think it'd be somewhere around about $30 million worth of fish produced within the state of Florida. So it's a very big domestic market, which is basically aimed at the local industry. One interesting trend that continues is the growing importance of China as an import market. Now, I've pulled the China and Hong Kong imports data together, 15% of world trade. Certainly China has, the imports into Hong Kong haven't increased, it's all mainland China. In terms of Europe, Germany continues to be one of the stronger countries. France, the Netherlands, the UK, Spain are all important importers as well. Japan has a strong market, probably with the economic sort of lull that they've had over the last 10 years or so. It hasn't been as strong as what it used to be, but they have a very strong domestic market breeding koi, and they also export them, but certainly they still consume a lot of fish. One of the interesting things is Singapore is still a major importer, and most of that's based on the fact that they bring fish in from other surrounding countries from Asia for re-export. So in terms of marines, normally what we'd see is that the USA would be the major importer. This particular year, though, the Netherlands was. Now, talking with some of the importers in the Netherlands, it's more than likely that this was due to some large imports of fish for public aquariums, which are actually recorded in UN Comtrade in the same category as ornamental fish. And that was likely the reason why the Netherlands was such a strong importer that year. See, they're basically dominated by sort of European and US, the European countries and US. So what I wanted to talk about is just a few little trends in that we see. Some of the challenges, and certainly, as an industry, we continue to face a lot of different challenges. The retail landscape, as like for all, I suppose, retail industries, has changed a lot over the last years. We've seen different market trends. And, one of the big things over the recent sort of 10, 15 years is a lot of increased competition from other hobbies and pastimes, particularly, internet, online gaming, etc. When I was a child, I remember, having a fish tank was a great thing, and, you'd have a tank at home and you could spend hours playing around with a fish tank. But my children certainly, they liked the fish tank, didn't want to have anything to do with it, happy to look at it, didn't want to play with it. So it's one of the things that it's been talked a lot in our industry is the fact that, not a lot of young people are coming into the market, but I think that's changing, which is good. Sustainability, invasive alien species and other environmental issues, as Sven pointed out, the CITES trade certification, etc. These are all pretty important things, and certainly there's a demand from stakeholders and people within the trade, etc., that are, they're demanding that we do a better job of these issues. And certainly, we need to look after the environment. We do rely on having good, clean water to grow our fish and to collect our fish. We need to have sustainability in the industry. And I think one of the frustrations is quite often we're an easy target by a lot of groups to pick on. Well, if we stop collecting fish, we'll fix the problem. But certainly, there's different groups like Project Piaba in South America where, they've actually proven that having a sustainable collection fishery can have huge benefits in conservation of the entire area. And we've seen that, where these activities are being managed properly, that there's no problems with deforestation because people have got a sustainable livelihood. If they weren't able to collect fish, perhaps they'd start cutting down the forest and farming. And I think, there's other examples of that within Indonesia, Bali, and I think Gayatri is talking about some of this later on. And I think, as an industry, we need to improve what we do, but we also need to acknowledge that we're doing a pretty good job in some cases. And I'll talk a little bit more about these as we go on. The other one that sort of continues to increase, or the other issue that continues to increase, is animal welfare issues. And again, as I indicated before, we do have a duty of care to make sure that we look after the animals that we deal with. And certainly, from a purely economic point of view, no one makes money out of dead fish. And if the mortality rates were as high as what some groups say they are, we certainly wouldn't have an industry. The other big thing that we face is biosecurity, disease and health status. Again, these are big issues. And it's not just fish diseases. There's also concerns about zoonotic diseases. The question was raised before. There certainly is the potential to have some bacterial diseases pass on to humans, like in terms of skin infections, etc. Not a huge occurrence of it. Certainly not very common, but it is possible. So again, we need to acknowledge these things. And I guess the thing is that these challenge areas are going to produce more regulation, legislation, etc. And it's coming from the government, but it's been forced by different advocacy groups that are saying that we need to do a better job, or maybe we shouldn't do it at all. But there's different stakeholders have a lot of input to government, which will help to generate some of these regulations and legislation. And I guess the thing is that COVID-19 has, in a way, fueled a lot of anti-trade lobbyists and people that want to see the end of all wildlife trade, not just for our industry, but for all industries. So, there are increased expectations by stakeholders for us, and we need to rise to that as an industry. But at the same token, these concerns do need to be, science-based. We don't accept just ideological, frameworks to produce new legislation. We're very happy to deal with people and negotiate science-based outcomes. So Sven highlighted a couple of the impacts we've seen from CITES on a couple of different species. And certainly our industry, we have seen some different or some major changes over the past sort of 30 or so years, new technology, new species, new management practices. So, the industry has grown a lot over the times. We've also seen changes though to the regulation, which has impacted a lot of businesses around the world. So some of the things that we've seen, and particularly for Asian exporters, they have had changes like in Europe or Australia or other countries have had major impacts on the exporters. For China, the UK stopped shipments of goldfish due to concerns over SVC. Malaysia also had an impact where the EU stopped accepting health certificates for cold water fish, so koi and goldfish. And they had some problems actually shipping those fish into Singapore as well. So that cost the industry a lot of money, a lot of export dollars. And we've seen the issues that Sven's raised with CITES. There's been the Indonesian and the Fiji ban on coral exports. All these can have major effects, not only to the businesses that are dealing with them in their own country, but also the industry as a whole. Indonesia, for example, was, they probably supplied 60% or so of all corals in the trade. To have them banned overnight meant there was a massive hole in the marketplace. So it was very hard to fill that void. Certainly, there's a lot more cultured corals being done within the US and Europe, etc., to pick up that demand. But certainly there was a huge demand for more coral supplies after that ban. So it can actually impact not just the people that are importing or exporting, but it'll also impact on people at the retail level and even the hobbyists and consumers. I guess the key thing is, we are a global industry, and what happens in one country can actually have a knock-on effect to other countries. So it's something that we need to be aware of. And, these are very real threats to the industry, and we need to operate, in a sound and sustainable manner to meet these challenges. So what are some of the market trends? And I think there's a couple other speakers later on in the conference series that are talking a bit more about some of the market trends, but I don't think it really matters what country it is, but we've seen an increasing importance or number of corporate chains in major markets. PetSmart, Petsco, Petbarn in Australia, Pets at Home in the UK. So there's a number of different sort of large corporate chains, and that's been good in a way because they actually bring a lot more, I suppose, marketing, promotion of the industry, but it also has been seen to impact the industry. A lot of these stores have a much smaller and more basic range of fish. They don't have a lot of the high-end, expensive species, and the staff are often criticising of having a lack of knowledge, and they're not really able to mentor new hobbyists. Some stores do a much better job than others, but these are sort of general criticisms. And I guess another thing that we see, and I have had some quite robust discussions with exporters and everything, complaining about pricing, and it's very much seen as that a lot of these large corporate entities are very price margin sensitive, and they put a lot of pressure on suppliers to reduce, to keep the costs down, to not increase the costs of products like fish. This pressure goes down through the supply chain. And I can remember at a conference about 18 months ago, I had a Sri Lankan exporter complaining that he was getting paid less now for the fish than what he was 10 years ago. He said, I can't make my fish any cheaper. I'll have to close my business. This farmer was one of the major exporters out of Sri Lanka, employs hundreds of people, like literally hundreds of people. And he said, look, I just can't do it anymore. I need a price rise. So this is a concern. And I think anyone that's been involved in supply chain logistics and managing buying and that, it is important that everyone makes money. If anyone gets too greedy at one point of the supply chain, it can make it very, very difficult to have a robust, good supply chain. If you can't make money out of a product, you have to look at ways to cut costs, and sometimes that can impact on the quality and service that you're able to provide. So it is something that's a little bit of a concern. So some of the other market trends, I mean, we're obviously seeing a huge, I suppose, explosion in small aquariums and nano tanks. These definitely seem to be what people are wanting, downsizing from the large tanks that we've seen, that I sort of grew up with in the hobby. Aquascaping has certainly taken off, and it's just amazing to go to some of these aquascaping shows and the trade shows and that and see these beautiful tanks, just amazing livescapes, just absolutely amazing. And I think that's probably where we will see a lot of growth in the industry over the coming years. Invertebrates like shrimps, extremely popular, and again that can feed into the aquascaping sort of theme. A lot of the cherry shrimp, crystal shrimp type species are very good in a planted aquarium. Marines are definitely growing, and I think they're going to continue to grow in importance. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. Part of it is, I think, largely in part due to the reduced cost of equipment. Over the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of really good quality, cheap skimmers and sort of other key equipment that you need for marine fish. It's nowhere near as expensive as what it used to be to set up a marine fish, and certainly I think we were better at managing the species. We're seeing a lot more aquacultured marine fish as well, which is very, very encouraging. And I definitely think the marines will continue to grow. And I guess one of the things that we've been sort of talking about as an industry for a number of years is seems to be less people entering the hobby. If you go to any fish hobby group around the world, you'll probably see that most people are pension age or more, very few young people, and which is disappointing. But I think, as time goes on, we're seeing a lot stronger sort of communities grow on social media. There's a lot of user groups around the world, Facebook, etc., that are very strong, have thousands of members, dealing with aquarium fish, which is very encouraging. And although we're sort of seeing that trend of having less people entering the hobby, the feedback I've had this year, I tend to say that there has been a bit of a resurgence. A lot of people who've decided with the COVID lockdown, what am I going to do at home? I'm sick of looking at four walls. Let's get a fish tank. So maybe we will see a bit of a resurgence over the next couple of years due to the COVID thing. So hopefully maybe one silver lining out of what's happened this year. So in terms of the markets that are growing, Asia and the Middle East we see that they're growing. Significant cultural, these countries have significant cultural attachment to keeping of fish, probably more so than European-based cultures. So people who will do it, and if they can afford it, and as people earn more money in these countries, they're able to actually invest some money into the hobby. And there's a lot of cultural and religious applications to that. Again, I mentioned before, South America is growing. Certainly, there's a huge population in Brazil and the other countries in South America, and they have a developing middle class that are looking to spend money. And again, aquarium fish is one of the things that they're tending to spend money on. It's also something that a lot of people don't realise. There's quite a strong industry in Turkey, Iran, and some of the other Arab states, and certainly a lot of very high-end, expensive tanks sold throughout some of the Arab states. And there's a growing market there as well. I suppose one of the things that a lot of us have had to deal with, though, is that most of the Western markets, like the US, Australia, Europe, and that, have remained largely static over the last few years with little or no growth. And it's something that we need to address in some way. There's been a lot of discussion on what we can do, and it's frustrating. If we had a nice advertising budget, we'd promote the industry more, but it's a bit beyond our capabilities at the moment. So I mentioned sustainability, and look, I guess we hear a lot about sustainability in all parts of our life. The use of fossil fuels, what we're doing to the environment. It is a growing importance to everyday life for everything we do. But what does it mean to us, to our industry, and what can we do? Well, I guess if you start looking at what are the environmental impacts of our industry, and if you're serious about it, there are quite a few. Harvesting and collecting of fish from the wild. We have farming. So people use farms, they use land, they use water. There are issues with invasive species. We consume electricity and fossil fuels for operating and manufacturing. We take fish from different environments to make artificial feeds for fish. And there's also the air freight, etc. So there are some impacts. But I guess the thing is, though, there are impacts. We need to manage them. But there are some benefits. And I think that's one of the things that we really do need to focus on in terms of moving forward. Now, this infographic here was actually done by OATA, the Automatic Aquatic Trade Association based out of the UK, which we work closely with. And this was sort of the brainchild of Keith Davenport, who was the former executive and since retired. This was sort of his last hurrah. And I think the whole document, which you can get from their website, it's a really good document, and it really highlights some of the big benefits that we have to our industry. We create jobs around the world. One of the key things for a lot of developing countries is what sort of industries do people have, especially if they're in remote areas. And fishing, whether it's for food fish or for ornamental fish, is an activity that they can partake in. And if it's done properly, it's a sustainable livelihood. As I mentioned before, maybe 10 to 12,000 people involved with the coral industry in Indonesia. Certainly thousands more involved with the wild fish marine collection as well. So these are big industries. I'd love to have a number on how many people actually are employed across the industry around the world, but it's, there's millions of people involved in that trade. And for a lot of those people, they have a very little other avenue to make money. If they're not collecting ornamental fish, they're going to be collecting food fish off a reef, or they're going to be doing something else, taking coral to make to make concrete, things like that. So there's a lot of things that we can do. We can hang our hat on to say that we're doing a good job. Certainly, there are some areas where we need to improve, but by and large, we're doing a pretty good job of being sustainable. Now, one of the key things that's driving legislation in a number of countries is invasive alien species, and our industry is not the only industry involved with having invasive species. The farming industry, or many different sectors, but it is a big problem for a lot of countries. So invasive alien species are a species that's not native to an area or a country that can or could establish a breeding population and impact the local waterways in the case of fish. And there's about 400 or so species of ornamental fish that could become, or species of ornamental fish and plants that could become invasive in different countries. So in some cases it's plants, in other cases fish, in some cases invertebrates. And we've got a few here. Carp, which is a major problem in Australia. It's said that European carp are causing several $1 billion worth of damage to the environment. They're actually not from the ornamental fish industry. They were food fish, or come from food fish farm, but big industry, big impact. Apple snails or mystery snails are a big impact in a number of countries around the world. Water hyacinth, snakeheads, etc. So there are some species of fish or plants or invertebrates in our industry that can be an issue in different countries. So this is driving changes to legislation. In the EU, where we're actively participating in this, there's a number of different species, lists of species that have been proposed by the EU as being invasive, and they want to control them. So basically the options are developing or positive or white lists of species that can be traded, or producing lists of noxious or banned species or blacklists that can't be imported or traded. And the problem is that sometimes it's a species of fish that, that's part of our industry, but it's actually because of other industry sectors that there's an issue. And I guess a good example is in Spain, where they listed koi carp as being noxious. Now, this was somewhat unintentional. There's a big problem in some of the waterways with European carp. Now, European carp and koi carp are the same scientific, denoted as having the same scientific name. The new legislation was drawn up to control the European carp in the waterways, but because koi carp has the same scientific name, it's caught up with it. So it's a bit of a big impact. But I guess, the key thing is, as an industry, we need to be aware of, what species are able to be traded and what aren't. And we need to respect the local laws. The other thing is, we also need to avoid releasing fish into natural waterways. One of the things is that, a lot of hobbyists, when they don't want their fish anymore, they might take it down to the local river and let it go into a river because they think it's doing the fish a favour. Unfortunately, it's not doing the environment any favour. So, there is a big need to educate customers and hobbyists around the world, and different retail organisations and trade groups around the world have actually been involved with trying to put out information about, not releasing fish into the waterways. Now, one of the problems that we see, and from my own personal experience in Australia, is that a positive import list, in some ways it's good because you know exactly what can come in because it's on a list. The problem with that, though, it can be highly problematic to industry because it's very, very hard to add new species onto that list. The list in Australia was actually developed in 1984, I believe it was, and it was basically a grandfather list. So it was a list of species that were being imported at the time, minus a few particularly noxious sort of species that didn't really have a place in the trade, which were banned. Now, since that was done in 1984, there's been, I think, 3 or 4 new species of fish added to that list. It's extremely, extremely hard to add new ones on. It was actually a new one added about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I believe. But yeah, it's very, very hard. And I guess the thing is, where countries implement a positive list, that's our fear is that it's going to be very hard to bring new species onto that list as they get discovered. And a great example would be Denisoni, the torpedo barb from India. It's a beautiful fish, only discovered part of the hobby 10, 15, 20, within the last 20 years. We can't have it in Australia because it wasn't imported before the import ban. So it's a big frustration. And where there isn't legal trade, there's a propensity to have illegal trade. So, it is a big concern. And I guess one of the big examples is the lionfish. Now, there's a lot of contention about how the lionfish in the Atlantic and Caribbean originated. A lot of fingers are pointed out at our industry, but there's also some debate that it may have come from a small public aquarium. But lionfish, if you didn't know, are native to the Caribbean or the Atlantic. And I think the first sighting there was in 1990 or the early 90s. And since then, it's just spread everywhere. I worked in Jamaica for a couple of years, and it's amazing how many are there. It's just very, very invasive species, and it's having a big impact on the environment there. And it's a good example of what can happen and why we need to have good controls and a good duty of care. And aquatic animal welfare. Animal welfare is a big issue. And obviously, as I've said before, we do have a duty of care to be, responsibly look after the livestock that we deal with. And it's becoming more and more important in all sort of areas of agriculture and fisheries. So it's not just us, and certainly the aquaculture industry and the wild harvest or fishing industry is also coming under a lot more scrutiny. People are saying that having fish in tanks and ponds is cruel. You shouldn't keep fish in a glass jar. We're destroying the environment. We shouldn't keep certain types of fish. And this is driving a lot of increased pressure to legislate minimum standards for operators in the industry. The fear is, though, that these will be not based more on emotion rather than science-based facts, and it can lead to huge increases in the operating costs and the viability of some of the fish that we trade in. So again, we have no problem with regulation as long as there's a scientific basis for that regulation and it's not based on emotion. And I think the thing is that it's important to acknowledge too, though, that good operators are already managing the welfare of their fish in a good way. If you're doing all the things you need to do to keep fish alive, you're actually providing good welfare outcomes for those fish. Fish that aren't healthy are not going to survive. So, having good welfare is basically good practice, which gives you healthy fish and hopefully gives you more profits. So there is a benefit to actually being, having good welfare principles, because it actually makes the product that you're dealing with healthier and survives much, much higher survival rate. But I think there are some practices in the industry that are quite questionable. The practices of dyeing or tattooing fish. So we can see these couple of images here. It is cruel. It's certainly something we don't condone. And it is actually illegal in some countries. So again, you need to have a good understanding of the local laws that you're dealing with. And certainly, as an industry association, it's not something that we like to see. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is biosecurity, and the health status of fish is really important, particularly for exporting. A lot of the exporting is based on having health certificates to say that the fish are disease-free, and these regulations are becoming a lot more stricter around the world. But as I said, the biosecurity is not just about fish disease itself. There's also discussion about increased antibiotic resistance in bacteria. So not just within our industry, but in all animal husbandry industries. And the fear is that indiscriminate use of antibiotics and other chemicals in our industry can lead to the development of antibiotic-resistant bacteria that could cause a problem in other animals and even in humans. There's also concern about zoonotics. And as I said before, we had a question about the risks of dealing with a lot of birds and that. The chance of the zoonotics from fish is quite low. Probably the main one that we see that's has sort of any incidence in the industry is tuberculosis or fish TB, which results in sores or wounds on hands that don't heal very well. There's some anecdotal evidence to suggest that there has been some increases in the incidence of this in some operations, but I think it's more the fact that people actually report it now rather than an increase in incidence. But it can be quite a nasty infection and hard to treat, and certainly something that with simple basic hygiene steps like washing your hands properly after you've been dealing with any animal or livestock is a pretty important part of making sure that you're not going to have any zoonotic episodes. So that's sort of broad strokes. That's what's been some of the challenges in that. I guess in terms of over the past 2 or 3 years, we have seen, I think, a growing pressure on the industry, particularly the marine sector. And look, we feel this has been driven by certain activist groups, but again, if there's valid scientific reasons why we need to change what we do, we're happy to look at that. But we're seeing some ban of coral exports from Fiji and from Indonesia. These were, we were actually not quite sure what they were based on. There wasn't really any science or discussion about it. It was just a unilateral decision made by the relevant ministers. The proposed CITES Marine Ornamental Workshop, it is a big concern, and I'm very happy that Karen's been online and sort of made some good points before. It's good to see that there's some engagement with that. It's also seen some issues in Vietnam with temporary closures of marine exports and coral exports from there. There's continuing legal actions going on in Hawaii. OFI hasn't had much to do with that. It's been a PJAC, mainly PJAC involved with that, but certainly there's a very strong push to stop marine collection in Hawaii. And obviously COVID-19 has had major effects this year. So these are some of the things that we've been dealing with more recently. And look, I just wanted to touch on, I know Sven talked a lot about the workshop, but I guess, we do have some concerns. We know that there's certain activist groups driving some of this agenda. I guess what the big concern about this is how it's going to be managed. I believe this is the first time in the history of CITES that such a large group of species has actually been targeted. Depending on what sort of figures you look at, there's maybe anything up to 2,500 species of marine fish traded in our industry. I think it's great that there's going to be risk assessments done on each species, but I just question how that's going to be achieved. It's just such a huge workload, years and years of work. And whether this is going to be done thoroughly or not, that's our big concern. Again, if there's species that need to be managed and there's a scientific valid reason for it, we're very happy to support that. But, if it's just not very valid science that's used, it is a big concern. And we also hope, though, that the FAO is going to be involved in this. Now, the FAO is part of the UN. It's recognised expert on fisheries and aquaculture around the world, and certainly they've had some very good, they produce a lot of really good work and research, and we've had some dealings with them in the past, and we certainly hope that CITES will be reaching out to FAO, to their expertise, and to help manage a science-based outcome for the industry. I can't repeat it enough. We're very happy to to have regulation as long as it is science-based decision making. So we really look forward to engaging more with Karen and CITES. And look, I won't keep harping on about this, but there is a big concern that if there's emotional decisions made, it's going to have a major impact. And I guess the final point down there, remember the African grey parrot trade after listing. It's not just going to be wild caught fish that are affected by any changes in regulation or any listings. It's going to be farm fish as well. So that it can have a huge impact on our industry. So I guess just to sort of summarise what I've been talking about, there's no doubt that regulation in our industry is going to increase over time. Different countries will have different sort of staged increases in how they legislate and what they legislate about. But I think, it doesn't matter which country it is, there will be changes that we'll see over time. So there's going to be more red tape. We just hope that this is based on science, and we do see that complying to any regulations around the world is very important. We need to be operating within the law, within our industry. It's futile to attempt to go around different regulations and laws. We need, it's a core part of our OFI charter is to trade legally. I think that we see that the market is demanding more sustainable products, which probably means there's going to be an increasing demand for aquaculture products over wild collected products, whether it be freshwater or marine. It was one of the major retail chains in the US is demanding, basically having farm corals. They don't want to have wild collected corals anymore. So, these are things that the industry needs to address and move with. And I think, one of the things is that the industry does need to work together more. We need to improve in a number of areas to meet stakeholder and market expectations going forward. And I think this is a key thing to, as an industry, we need to develop. It's good to get new blood in, new ideas. But communication is a real key to improving our industry. We need to talk together. I think there's a lot of very strong competition in the industry, particularly in the export sector. A lot of new businesses coming into it. That's great. We encourage competition, but I think it's also important that as an industry we come together and we talk and we manage through some of the issues that we're facing. And certainly, OFI would encourage more people to join our group. But if you can't join our industry association, I think it's important to work through your local government, your local country organisations. We do work with different groups from all around the world. We continually talk with different trade associations all around the world. PJAC in Canada and the US. There's the exporter associations from most of the Asian countries. We talk to other groups within the EU. Certainly even in China, we talked to a couple of the associations there. So, it is important that we all are on the same page and work together to make our industry better for the future. So that's a bit of a snapshot of OFI and where we sort of see the industry. If you want to have any more information, my email is president@ofish.org. Our Secretary General, Paul Backwell, who will be talking later on, can be contacted on the Secretariat email address, and our website is www.ofish.org. And look, once again, just like to take the opportunity to thank Minnie and the team at CUSAT. This is a great idea. It's very encouraging to see so many people participating. Sorry, I hope I haven't bored everyone about OFI, but really do appreciate your time, and thanks for inviting me, Minnie. Happy to take some questions.
Yes, that was Shane Willis, President of Ornamental Fish International. Yes, he's ready to take questions. The platform is open for discussion.
Oh, everyone's gone to sleep.
Oh, no. John? Swain?
Hi, Sven. I have a question.
With Spain.
Danny.
Sorry, Danny, I cut across you. You carry on, Danny.
Good to see you all. Long
Good to
time.
see you, Danny.
Yeah, good to see you. You mentioned earlier that COVID-19 had a fueled anti-trade legislation. Could you detail a bit on that? How, why?
Look, and it's Sven may also be able to talk to this a bit. Certainly seen in a lot of sectors, not just for our sector, but across animal trade in general. A lot of animal activist groups are saying that there should be a total ban in the trade of wildlife because wherever there's wildlife, there's a potential for COVID. There's very little science involved with that. And again, I think the problem is some groups are using the current pandemic situation to spread misinformation, which they can be reasonably good at times. But yeah, there's probably very little science together to support that. But certainly there's, we've seen social media around the world in different areas. A lot of these groups are pushing the agenda that we should stop the total trade in wildlife to prevent, pandemics like COVID again. Thanks, mate.
Can I come in now? And again, as with Spain, it's a comment rather than anything else, because Shane, you mentioned on several occasions, quite rightly, the fact that consumers, hobbyists need to be educated about us and our industry. And we've talked about this over the years, but I'm not sure. Well, no, I don't think that we've made anywhere near the progress that we should be making in this field. And a couple of weeks ago, I had a fantastic example of this. I'm in contact with various hobbyists around the world, and one of whom I've known for over 30 years, based in the UK. Now, this is a really serious specialist hobbyist who specializes in things like spiny eels, large cichlids, large catfish, and so on. And we're in contact with each other. And several weeks back, I sent him a copy, a PDF of our May issue, the one that of the journal where we dealt with sustainable livelihoods and so on. And I thought, let him see a little bit of what we're about. And within a couple of days, he came back, and his response was fascinating, because he said, I must admit, John, that at first I wasn't really interested in looking at the PDF you sent me, because it had to do with the industry, and I don't have anything to do with the industry. He said, but since I had it, I had a look at it. And his word was that he was enthralled by what he read. He said, I never, ever had any clue that there were so many people in so many countries working so hard at sustainability within the industry. This is totally new to me. Now, I'm talking here of a hobbyist, so many, many, many years experience. And it exemplifies, the lack of knowledge that there is of what we're doing, and that the image that people out there have of what we're about. So like I said, it wasn't a question, it was more a comment.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, John. And quite often, it doesn't matter, what industry it is. The industry tends to get painted as the boogeyman. They're doing all these terrible things to everything. And certainly some industries are worse than others, but some operators aren't responsible, don't take their duty of care seriously. But I think by and large, most people want to see fish in the ocean. They want to see coral reefs. Certainly, as a trade and a hobby, a lot of interest comes from people going to coral reefs and enjoying nature. Having an aquarium in a home is being able to bring some of that nature back into the house. But I think, whether it's fish or other wildlife, if people actually have that as part of their lives, I think they value it a lot more as well. And I think the tragedy for for humans, for our society would be if we were no longer able to interact with animals of any sort, where does that leave us? We have no knowledge or no empathy of what wildlife is. Who's going to be interested to look after it? So I think in actual fact, if we go down the road where there's no trade in wildlife or fish, people will lose interest. And that's certainly not a good thing for the wildlife. Why people have an emotional attachment through hobbies and the passion to look after things, I think that actually is a good thing for the future of sustainability. So interesting times.
Okay, we have two questions coming up. One from Karen Dana and one from Infofish. We'll ask Infofish. Sherlyn Maria Antonisa Me has some question to Shane. Okay, proceed, Sherlyn.
Thank you, Winnie. Thank you very much for organizing this very interesting meetup conference. And Shane, thank you for the very interesting presentation. There's a lot that we've learned, or rather I've come to know on what really has been happening in the ornamental fish trade, particularly during this COVID pandemic. As you may know, Infofish, we monitor the food fish trade mostly a lot. And we've been particularly looking at the trends during the COVID pandemic. And a very interesting trend that we've been realized during this period is there's been a lot of online trading going on in trying to get consumers having access to the fish, food fish particularly. I was just wondering whether this is something that you would have also noticed for the ornamental fish trade. I'm not sure how that would work, but I'm just curious whether this is also an option that traders are looking into selling the supplies or trading online for this. The other comment, or also probably, I'm not sure if you could enlighten us. I've come to read that many airlines are now converting their airlines, commercial airlines to cargo airlines during this, particularly during this COVID-19 pandemic. Is there something that that would have helped the trade a little bit on that? Thank you.
All right. First question: the trading online. I think that the online sales of fish and accessories has grown over the time. I'm not sure it's legal in, particularly the retail trade of fish is legal or is allowed to be promoted in some countries. I think maybe the UK you can't do that, but I could be wrong. So, from a hobbyist perspective, there's a lot of retail shops that do trade online. In terms of, I think you're talking more about exporters or exporters sending fish to consumers. Is that
yes
what you were saying? Yeah. I think that there's certainly some companies I have seen that are doing that. I think that the problem is the costs involved. There can be a lot of costs in terms of border checkpoint inspections and documentation and that can make it extremely expensive to bring fish in.
Right.
Maybe for very high-end expensive fish, but I think for most species, I don't know if it'd actually be worthwhile. The other thing that comes into that too is in terms of the freight. If you're sending one box of fish, you're going to be paying a huge amount of money for the freight, probably 20, 30, 40, 100 times more than what a large consignment of commercial consignment would be. So I'm not sure, in terms of international trade, whether that's going to ever be a big thing. But I think though within countries, domestic sort of supplying a domestic market, certainly that is important and it's growing. And I think COVID would only have helped that grow. Sorry, what was the second question now?
Well, I mean, it was more like a comment or something which I read. I came across that.
The airlines.
The airlines, yeah, many of the commercial airlines are converting their airlines, or rather have converted the airlines to cargo.
Yeah.
Is this something
Look,
that...
certainly, the big issue that we've seen this year is the lack of capacity for airlines. Most ornamental fish were transported on passenger planes, and obviously with very few passenger planes flying at the moment, it's become a big challenge. I have heard of for other, not for ornamental fish, but for other live animals, that there's been charter flights organised, but they're costing 3 or 4 times what they have been costing. So certainly we'd welcome the as many airlines as possible converting planes to cargo to take more fish. It has been a major impact. Like for some countries, they're still not able to actually export fish because of the lack of flights. So definitely would be welcome to have more capacity.
Thank you, Shane. Also, just to add on that, InfoFish is an intergovernmental organization in this region, and we'll be more than happy to share any information you'd like to have, or whether you have on the industry through our magazine or website. Please share with us, and we'll be happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Sati Vijaypura as well as Karen Gaynor. We'll take up Karen Gaynor from CITA Secretariat first, and then move on to Sati Vijaypura. Okay, proceed, Karen.
Okay, thank you, Minnie, for giving me the floor again. And thank you, Shane, for your very interesting presentation. I wanted to take the floor on 2 issues. The first one was, there's been questions about how CITES is dealing with the zoonotic diseases and all of this press calling for bans on wildlife trade. And I wanted to let you know that, as Svein said earlier, that we don't have a mandate to deal with zoonotic diseases, but obviously we have some responsibility if there's a link to international trade. So as he said, we work very closely with other organizations who have got a mandate to deal with some of these. And one of the things we do is we are one of the partners in the Collaborative Partnership for Sustainable Wildlife Management. It's called the CPW. And this also includes FAO, CBD, OIE, IIED, CMS. There's 14 partners, so it's a big group of people. And we have been working on, over the last few weeks, on producing a document which will be released tomorrow. And we've developed 4 guiding principles to reduce the risk from zoonotic diseases. So what I'll do tomorrow is I'll be able to provide you with the link to read this, but I thought it was important to just highlight that one of the first principle of this statement is to recognize the importance of the use of wildlife for many communities, including Indigenous peoples and local communities. So I think that the livelihoods issue is obviously extremely important to us. And we have many case studies where we can show that sustainable use can actually be beneficial not only to the livelihoods of the communities, but also to the conservation of the species. So we're continuing to gather case studies of this. So, livelihoods is a concern for us. And to be able to have a sustainable trade, that is the ideal scenario. So I wanted to stress that. And I will be able to give you a bit more information on this tomorrow. Just the second principle is maintaining healthy and resilient ecosystems. And then the third one is the persecution, including the killing of wild animals suspected of transmitting diseases, will not address the spread, the causes of the emergence or spread of zoonotic diseases. And then the fourth principle is then to regulate, manage and monitor harvesting, trade and use of wildlife to ensure it's safe, sustainable and legal. They're the 4 guiding principles. So I'll give you the link tomorrow, so you'll be able to read that in more detail. But just to let you know that work is going on in collaboration with lots of different partners on this issue. And the other thing that I wanted to mention or react to was, for me, it's important for me as CITES, I should say, it's very important for us to understand what the concerns of the industry are. So your presentation, Shane, was very clear in giving us a picture of what the current trends are. And of course, COVID has thrown a curveball into everything, basically.
Yeah.
But you had specific concerns about the workshop. And you indicated that you thought this was the first time that CITES had had looked at a large group like this. And I think there's a perception that the results of the workshop will lead to listing proposals. And I just wanted to point out that CITES in the past looked at snakes in a very similar way. So there was a large workshop pulling all the information together on snakes, and it did not lead to a single listing proposal, even though the results of the workshop showed that some species would qualify for potentially for listing. Because the important thing is the workshop is all the experts, but it's still up to a party to present a listing proposal. The outcome of a workshop does not predict that there would be a listing proposal. So I just wanted to sort of reassure people that it doesn't lead to any kind of automatic listing of that. But again, I'll reiterate my point that the best way of ensuring that your views are taken on board is to engage in the process from the very beginning. And that's why, yeah, I will continue to recommend that you do that. And there is a trend now to look a little bit more on non-CITES listed larger groups. So at COP18, not only did we get an instruction to look at marine ornamental fishes, but we've also have an instruction to look in a very similar way at the non-CITES listed songbirds. There's about 6,000 species, and also amphibians. So it's not, marine ornamental fish are not being, you know, targeted as the only group that is getting a focus. So I just wanted to kind of explain the process a little bit more and just reassure you that it's not some sort of an automatic process that because there's a workshop, it will lead to listing proposals. So just a couple of points to clarify. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. And look, yeah, appreciate, and we understand that it's not an automatic thing. We just want to make sure that recommendations that do come out of it are based on good science. So that's the major concern.
Well, as I said, that's exactly what we want as well. So please engage in the process. Yeah. Okay.
We're trying.
Okay.
Okay. There's a question from Satyendra Vijaypura, Sri Lanka. He says, "Hi Shane, what are the remedial actions you propose as president of OFI on behalf of the industry to protect the industry at the prospect of coming CITES workshop?"
Well, I guess the thing is, what we're trying to do is represent the industry, and we'll be there with some other people. So we want to look at what the findings are that comes from out of the consultancy reports. We'll be checking to see that the information that's been supplied is certainly information that we agree with. We want to make sure that the issues in terms of livelihoods and stuff are heard, and I'm glad that Karen sort of reiterated that is an important fact to her or to CITES. So some of it will come out of the consultancy reports that are generated for the workshop. So until we see more information from that will inform us as to what we'll actually be doing at the workshop.
I hope he has answered the
Maybe Sven might even have something to add.
Yeah, sorry, Karen, can I just jump in here again and say that I would hope that you would not have to wait until the outcome of the consultancy and the preparation of those documents. I hope that you will be fully consulted during the preparation of those documents and not wait until you see the outcome, because we want your input from the very beginning. So just to clarify that it will be in the terms of reference to ensure that industry and all stakeholders are consulted during the preparation of those documents.
That's fantastic. That's exactly what we want to.
Well, then we're all happy.
We are.
Okay.
Let's get it done.
Okay. Any more questions? Any more questions? There is Shane.
I do not have a question as such. I just want to add a comment also. And first of all, I would like to thank Karen Gaynor for actually taking the time to follow this webinar. As I think that it's as important for you to learn more about the ornamental aquatic trade as it is for everyone here to learn more about CITES. And I will also re-emphasize that we are certainly prepared as trade associations in this industry to do all we can to get reasonable regulations that actually do something good for conservation. And I highly appreciated your comments on the need to look at livelihoods and the incentives that use wildlife have for conservation. And well, it wasn't a surprise. I know that very many in CITES thinks exactly like that. So thanks again. And also thank you to Shane for a good summary of this industry. And you touched on some of the things I already spoke about, but it's only clarified the matter. So thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, and yeah, again, Karen, it is really good to have you here. I hope that, yeah, you find out some more really good things about our industry and can take those on board for back to CITES. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all. I will be here for the 3 days and I'm looking forward to learning a lot more. Yeah, I've open ears.
Thank you, Karen.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Karen.
Okay.
I said, did I see Paul Beckwell coming in? Any questions? Paul? Okay, I'd like to remind all the viewers to please keep looking at the website for further notifications regarding the next presentations. Always keep looking, going back to the website because we have a lot of interesting talks coming up. We have had interesting talks. You can see all that in the website as well as your YouTube. If there are no more questions, shall we close for now and get back after some time for Paul's presentation? And meanwhile, I would like to ask you a question, speakers. The opening ceremony, we have a short opening ceremony after some time. Would you be interested? Are you? Yeah? Okay, thank you. All right. See you then. See you then. And after that, we proceed with Paul Beckwell's talk, the Secretary General of Ornamental Fish International. On behalf of School of Industrial Fisheries, Cochin University of Science and Technology, I would like to thank the Shane Willis from Australia, who is the President of Ornamental Fish International once again. Thank you, Shane. Thank you very much. Yes.